And just hours before one of the most symbolic events in the royal calendar, something extraordinary began unfolding behind palace walls. Staff members noticed familiar faces disappearing from schedules. Invitations were quietly altered. Security protocols shifted without explanation. And at the center of it all stood Princess Anne, silent, composed, and seemingly determined to execute a decision that would send shockwaves through the monarchy. What nobody realized was that this was only the beginning of a royal reckoning years in the making. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The first signs were so subtle that most people dismissed them as routine adjustments. After all, preparations for Garter Day always involved layers of planning, revisions, and last-minute changes. But this time felt different. There was a tension moving through the corridors of royal administration, a feeling that something, a sign emerged, significant was unfolding just beneath the surface. Long-serving aides began noticing discrepancies in schedules that had already been approved. Names that had appeared on ceremonial briefings for weeks suddenly vanished. Trusted figures who had occupied the same positions year after year found themselves quietly reassigned or removed altogether. At first, nobody wanted to ask questions. In royal circles, discretion is often valued more highly than curiosity. Yet the silence only made the uncertainty worse. As preparations accelerated, palace employees found themselves comparing notes in hushed conversations. Access permissions were adjusted without warning. Seating arrangements underwent unexpected revisions. Certain members of Queen Camilla's trusted network appeared to be losing responsibilities they had held for years. No explanation accompanied these changes. No public acknowledgement followed. The removals simply happened, one after another, as though an invisible hand were ping the entire operation. That invisible hand, many believed, belonged to Princess Anne. Unlike others within the royal family, Anne had built her reputation on discipline, duty, and unwavering commitment to the institution itself. She was not known for dramatic displays or emotional confrontations. Her influence often operated quietly, making her actions even more difficult to ignore. According to growing whispers among staff, Anne was not merely aware of the changes, she was personally overseeing them. Directives reportedly passed through her office. Adjustments appeared to bear her approval. Decisions that would normally require lengthy consultation seemed to move forward with unusual speed. The deeper employees looked, the more unsettling the pattern became. Several of the individuals affected by the reshuffle shared one common characteristic. They were closely connected to Camilla's inner circle. Some had served alongside her for years. Others were considered among her most trusted, advisors. Yet one by one, their roles began shrinking or disappearing altogether. It was not a public purge. It was something far more sophisticated, a careful repositioning, a strategic realignment. And because it was happening so quietly, the implications felt even more powerful. As rumors spread, speculation intensified. Some believed Anne was responding to concerns that had been raised behind closed doors. Others claimed she had been preparing this move for months, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Veteran courtiers reportedly found themselves divided. One faction argued that Anne was protecting long-standing royal traditions. Another feared the consequences of challenging an established network of influence so close to the center of power. The uncertainty created a new kind of tension, one fueled not by what was known, but by what remained hidden. Questions multiplied with every passing day. Why now? Why before such an important event? What had happened behind Palace WA to trigger such a dramatic intervention? And perhaps most importantly, how would Camilla respond once the full scope of these changes became impossible to ignore? The answers remained frustratingly out of reach. Yet one thing was becoming increasingly clear. This was not simply about ceremonial logistics or administrative adjustments. Something larger was moving beneath the surface. Something rooted in relationships, loyalties, and decisions that stretched back much further than anyone outside the palace understood. But while staff scrambled to understand what was happening, few realized the roots of this decision stretched far beyond Garter Day itself. Royal crises rarely begin with public confrontations. They begin with glances, silences, forgotten invitations, and private disagreements buried beneath layers of protocol. For years, observers had noticed subtle signs of tension between Princess Anne and figures within Camilla's closest circle. Most dismissed them as routine lace politics. But now, viewed through a different lens, Those moments suddenly appeared to be warning signs of a much larger conflict quietly brewing beneath the surface. The more palace insiders reflected on the sudden removals ahead of Garter Day, the more their attention drifted backward through the years. What once seemed like isolated disagreements no longer looked isolated at all. Instead, they appeared to be pieces of a much larger puzzle, one that had been quietly assembling itself behind closed doors while the public focused on ceremonies, celebrations, and carefully managed appearances. The events unfolding now were not emerging from nowhere. They were the result of tensions that had been building slowly, patiently, and almost invisibly. At the heart of those tensions stood two very different visions of influence. On one side were the traditional royal loyalists, individuals who believed the institution could only survive through strict adherence to duty, hierarchy, and lawn, standing customs. On the other side stood a newer network of advisors and confidants whose growing presence around Camilla had gradually expanded their reach into key areas of royal operations. Neither side openly declared war against the other. That was not how palace conflicts worked. Instead, disagreements were buried beneath polite conversations, restrained smiles, and carefully chosen words that concealed far more than they revealed. Princess Anne had long been regarded as one of the monarchy's most steadfast guardians. While others attracted headlines, she built her reputation through consistency, discipline, and an unwavering belief that the crown must always come before individual ambition. To many long-serving members of staff, Anne represented stability itself. She understood the machinery of the institution better than almost anyone, and had little patience for anything she believed threatened its integrity. As Camilla's advisors became increasingly influential, whispers began circulating that Anne viewed some developments with growing concern. Those concerns rarely surfaced publicly. Instead, they reportedly emerged during private discussions where questions of loyalty, authority, and decision-making quietly dominated conversations. Several senior figures allegedly worried that competing centers of influence were beginning to form within the royal structure. Decisions that once followed established channels now appeared to involve different voices. Recommendations carried new weight. Certain advisors seemed to gain unprecedented access. Individually, these changes appeared minor. Collectively, they created an atmosphere of unease that became harder to ignore with each passing year. Looking back, palace observers began re-examining moments that had once seemed insignificant. A cancelled appearance here, an unexpected staffing change there, an absence from an important discussion, a disagreement that was quickly dismissed as routine. Each incident viewed, alone, meant very little, but together they painted a picture of steadily escalating friction. What many had mistaken for ordinary palace politics now looked like evidence of an ongoing struggle over influence and direction. As uncertainty grew, Anne reportedly adopted her characteristic approach. She did not engage in public disputes. She did not issue warnings through the press. Instead, she listened. She observed, and according to persistent palace rumors, she gradually strengthened relationships with long-serving staff members who shared her concerns about preserving institutional stability. These individuals were not necessarily powerful in the public sense, but they possessed something equally valuable: experience, loyalty, and a deep understanding of how the monarchy functioned behind the scenes. Meanwhile, nervousness spread among insiders who sensed that the balance of power was becoming increasingly fragile. The more influence certain advisors appeared to gain, the more quality. State questions emerged about where that influence might ultimately lead. Some believed adaptation was necessary for the monarchy's future. Others feared that core traditions were slowly being pushed aside. Beneath the surface, the divide continued widening, even as official appearances projected unity and calm. By the time preparations for Garter Day began, those underlying tensions had already been simmering for years. The sudden removals that shocked palace staff were not the beginning of the story. They were merely the first visible signs of a conflict that had been unfolding in silence for far longer than anyone realized. And as those hidden fault lines widened, one confidential meeting reportedly changed everything and set Anne on a course from which there would be no turning back. No cameras were present. No official statement was issued. Yet whispers about a private meeting began spreading almost immediately. Behind closed doors, key figures reportedly gathered to discuss concerns months. What was said remains unknown. But according to palace rumors, Princess Anne left that room with a level of determination that startled even those who knew her best, and within days, changes began appearing everywhere. As speculation intensified following years of quiet tension, attention increasingly focused on a single gathering that many insiders would later describe as a turning point. Unlike routine planning sessions or ceremonial briefings, this meeting carried an unusual level of secrecy. Invitations were reportedly limited. Details were tightly controlled. Even among palace staff accustomed to discretion, the lack of information stood out. Something important was being discussed, and those who were not invited seemed determined to discover why. The timing only deepened the mystery. Preparations for Garter Day were entering a critical phase, and questions regarding ceremonial arrangements had already begun generating private disagreements. Masses, according to palace whispers, the discussion moved far beyond logistics. What started as a conversation about planning allegedly evolved into a much larger debate about influence, authority, and the future direction of royal decision-making. For years, concerns had quietly accumulated beneath the surface. During this meeting, those concerns reportedly found a voice. Princess Anne, long respected for her unwavering commitment to duty, was said to have entered the discussion carrying more than simple reservations. Those familiar with her approach described someone who rarely acted impulsively and rarely spoke without purpose. If she chose to challenge something, it was because she believed the matter carried serious consequences. According to persistent rumors, Anne raised concerns about preserving the traditions and structures that had guided the monarchy through generations of uncertainty. She allegedly questioned whether certain boundaries were becoming blurred and whether too much. In Sanseian, influence was being concentrated within circles that had not traditionally held such authority. The atmosphere reportedly grew tense as differing perspectives emerged. Some participants allegedly argued that modern challenges required modern approaches. Others insisted that established traditions existed for a reason and that altering them carried risks that could not be ignored. No official account of the discussion has ever surfaced, which only fueled public fascination later. The absence of facts allowed speculation to flourish, and within palace corridors, the rumors became increasingly dramatic with each retelling. What seemed clear, however, was that several attendees reportedly left the meeting deeply unsettled. Individuals who normally projected confidence appeared unusually guarded. Conversations ended abruptly when others approached. Longtime insiders sensed that something significant had shifted, not because a formal decision had been announced, but because the tone had changed. The quiet disagreements that had once remained hidden now appeared to have crossed into more serious territory. In the days that followed, subtle signs began emerging that reinforced those suspicions. Staffing arrangements started changing. Responsibilities were quietly reassigned. Certain figures who had once enjoyed consistent access appeared to find doors closing around them. Nothing happened loudly. There were no dramatic declarations. Yet for those paying attention, the pattern was impossible to ignore. It was as though decisions made behind those closed doors were now being translated into action. Courtiers reportedly became obsessed with one question. Had lines been drawn during that meeting? Some believed compromises had failed. Others suspected that alliances had solidified and strategies had been set into motion. Every new adjustment seemed to support the growing belief that the gathering had not been a simple discussion, but the beginning of something far more significant. The palace atmosphere became increasingly strained as uncertainty spread through every level of the institution. What made the situation even more unsettling was the sense that nobody fully understood how far these changes would go. Staff members exchanged theories. Advisors monitored developments carefully. Senior figures watched and waited. And at the center of it all stood Princess Anne, whose actions suggested that whatever had occurred during that confidential meeting had only strengthened her resolve. Yet even those dramatic conversations could not prepare anyone for what happened when the first names started disappearing from official plans. The removals did not happen with dramatic announcements or public confrontations. They happened quietly. Access credentials changed. Seating arrangements shifted. Advisory roles were reassigned. One by one, individuals long associated with Camilla's trusted network found themselves moved aside. To outsiders, it looked procedural. To insiders, it felt like a carefully orchestrated operation designed to reshape the balance of influence before the eyes of the entire monarchy. In the aftermath of the confidential meeting, palace staff began noticing changes that were impossible to dismiss as coincidence. What had once been speculation suddenly became reality. Theories gave way to actions. Rumors transformed into evidence. Every morning seemed to bring another adjustment, another revision, another unexpected development. And while no official explanation accompanied these decisions, those working closest to the institution understood that something significant was unfolding. The first signs appeared in ceremonial planning documents. Responsibilities that had traditionally belonged to certain individuals were quietly reassigned elsewhere. Trusted advisors who had long occupied influential positions found themselves excluded from discussions where their presence had once been considered essential. Invitations shift, access permissions changed. Meetings took place without familiar participants. The pattern emerged slowly enough to avoid immediate attention, yet consistently enough to leave little doubt about its meaning. What made the situation especially remarkable was the precision with which the changes appeared to be carried out. This was not a chaotic restructuring. It was controlled, deliberate, strategic. Each adjustment seemed connected to a broader objective that remained hidden from public view. Those affected were not removed all at once. Instead, responsibilities were redistributed in stages, creating an atmosphere where uncertainty spread faster than information. Nobody knew who might be next. Nobody knew where the process would stop. According to growing palace rumors, many of the replacements came from circles known to enjoy Anne's confidence and trust. These were individuals with long-standing ties to traditional royal operations, people viewed by supporters as dependable custodians of institutional continuity. To Anne's allies, the changes represented a restoration of balance. To critics, however, they looked very different. They appeared to be a calculated effort to weaken a network that had spent years expanding its influence. As the revisions continued, security and logistics teams reportedly received a series of unusual directives. Access routes were modified. Operational plans underwent unexpected reviews. Seating arrangements that had already been finalized were revisited. Individually, each change seemed minor. Collectively, they created the unmistakable impression that someone was redesigning the structure surrounding one of the monarchy's most important ceremonial events. Among longtime palace veterans, reactions ranged from surprise to outright disbelief. Many had witnessed internal disagreements before, but few could remember a situation where changes of this scale unfolded with such speed and secrecy. Some privately admired the decisiveness hiding behind the operation. Others worried about the consequences. What united them all was a growing recognition that they were watching a major shift occur in real time. The uncertainty quickly evolved into anxiety. Every adjustment generated fresh speculation. Every rumor produced new questions. If members of Camilla's trusted network were losing responsibilities now, would additional removals follow? Was this merely the first phase of a larger restructuring? Or was something even more significant taking shape behind closed doors? The lack of answers only intensified the atmosphere of tension spreading throughout royal circles. For supporters of Camilla, the developments felt impossible to ignore. Many reportedly interpreted the changes as a direct challenge rather than a routine administrative decision. The symbolism alone was difficult to overlook. Individuals who had spent years helping shape important royal operations suddenly found themselves on uncertain ground. Their diminished role seemed to signal a broader message, one that extended far beyond ceremonial planning. Meanwhile, attention increasingly returned to Princess Anne herself. What exactly was her ultimate objective? Was she seeking to reinforce traditional structures she believed had been weakened? Was she responding to concerns that had never been publicly disclosed? Or was this part of a much larger strategy that had yet to fully reveal itself? The more questions people asked, the fewer answers seemed available. By this stage, the palace no longer felt divided merely by differing opinions. It felt divided by anticipation. Everyone sensed that the situation was still evolving. Everyone understood that the consequences of these decisions had not yet fully emerged. What began as subtle changes to schedules and responsibilities had transformed into a profound struggle over influence, trust, and authority. And as word quietly reached Camilla herself, the atmosphere inside royal residences reportedly shifted from confusion to outright alarm. Those expecting a public confrontation were disappointed. There were no speeches, no visible displays of anger, and no official rebuttals. Instead, Camilla reportedly responded with silence that many interpreted as far more revealing than any statement could have been. Behind palace doors, however, emotions were said to be running high as trusted allies suddenly found themselves on the outside looking in. By the time word of the removals reached Camilla's closest circles, the situation had already progressed beyond the point of simple reversal. Decisions had been implemented. Responsibilities had changed hands. Access had been adjusted. What made the development especially unsettling was the belief among some insiders that these changes had been underway long before anyone thought to raise objections. If that was true, then the operation had been unfolding quietly beneath the surface, while those most affected remained unaware of its final scope. According to palace speculation, Camilla first became aware of the growing reshuffle only after several key adjustments were already in motion. For years, her trusted advisors had operated within a framework that appeared stable and secure. Suddenly, that certainty began to erode. Individuals who once moved confidently through royal operations reportedly found themselves confronting unfamiliar obstacles. Invitations were different. Meetings felt different. The atmosphere itself seemed different. Nothing dramatic had been announced, yet everything appeared to be changing. What surprised many observers was Camilla's apparent refusal to engage publicly. Supporters expected resistance. Critics anticipated a response. Instead, they were met with silence. No official clarification emerged. No direct challenge was issued. Yet that silence became a story of its own. In royal life, words carry weight, but silence often carries even more. The absence of a public reaction encouraged. Endless interpretation. Some believed Camilla was carefully assessing the situation before acting. Others suspected she understood that responding too quickly could deepen an already sensitive conflict. Behind the scenes, however, rumors suggested that concern was spreading rapidly among her closest advisors. Individuals who had spent years helping shape important decisions reportedly struggled to understand how events had escalated so quickly. Some urged patience. Others allegedly argued that remaining passive could allow the situation to become permanent. Conversations grew increasingly urgent as speculation intensified. The uncertainty created a sense of vulnerability that few had experienced before. Meanwhile, royal observers became consumed by the search for clues. Every appearance, every interaction, every brief exchange suddenly attracted attention. Commentators and insiders analyzed even the smallest details, convinced that hidden messages were buried beneath carefully controlled public behavior. The challenge, however, was that the more people searched for answers, the more elusive those answers became. The mystery surrounding the situation only expanded. As pressure mounted, supporters within Camilla's broader network reportedly began encouraging a stronger response. Some viewed the removals as administrative decisions. Others saw something much more significant: a direct challenge to influence that had taken years to establish. The debate became increasingly emotional because it was no longer simply about positions or ceremonial responsibilities. It was about trust, loyalty, and the future balance of power within the institution itself. At the same time, palace factions quietly began taking sides. Not always openly, not always deliberately, but opinions formed, alliances strengthened, existing tensions deepened. Individuals who once maintained neutral positions found themselves pulled into a growing divide. The atmosphere became increasingly fragile as uncertainty spread throughout every layer of royal operations. Eventually, the escalating situation reportedly reached the attention of King Charles. Until then, many had viewed the developments as a dispute unfolding among advisors and administrators. But as concerns multiplied, the implications became impossible to ignore. The questions were no longer confined to staffing arrangements or ceremonial planning. They now touched the broader issue of unity within the monarchy itself. What made the entire episode even more remarkable was how little the public knew. Outside palace walls, life appeared unchanged. Ceremonies continued. Official duties proceeded. Statements remained carefully measured. Yet beneath that calm exterior, a dramatic struggle was unfolding, one defined by uncertainty, competing loyalties, and unanswered questions. And because nobody seemed willing to speak openly, the silence only fueled further speculation. Every day without clarification allowed rumors to grow. Stronger. Every unanswered question encouraged new theories. Every quiet adjustment reinforced the belief that something far larger was taking place behind closed doors. But if Camilla's reaction raised eyebrows, what happened next reportedly left even veteran palace insiders stunned. Few positions in the monarchy are more difficult than standing between loyalty and duty. As tensions escalated, attention inevitably turned toward King Charles. Would he intervene? Would he support Camilla's allies? Or would he allow Princess Anne's actions to proceed unchecked? According to growing speculation, the king suddenly found himself trapped between two powerful forces whose visions for the monarchy were becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile. As rumors continued spreading through palace corridors, one reality became impossible to avoid. No matter how carefully people discussed staffing changes, ceremonial revisions, or shifting alliances, every conversation eventually arrived at the SA. My question: what did King Charles think about all of this? For weeks, attention had focused on Princess Anne's actions and Camilla's silence. But now the spotlight was moving toward the one figure whose decision could potentially alter the entire course of events. According to palace speculation, Charles found himself facing an increasingly delicate challenge. On one side stood supporters of Anne, individuals who argued that the recent changes were necessary to protect the institution from growing internal complications. They viewed the adjustments not as personal attacks but as corrective measures designed to preserve tradition, reinforce established structures, and safeguard the monarchy's long-term stability. To them, Anne was not creating division, she was preventing it. On the other side stood voices loyal to Camilla and those connected to her trusted network. Their concerns were equally passionate. They warned that removing experienced advisors and reshaping long-standing relationships, monarchies carried serious risks. Trust, once damaged, could not easily be restored. Influence, once challenged, rarely retreated quietly. What appeared to some as a restoration of balance looked to others like the beginning of a deeper fracture that could create lasting consequences far beyond Garter Day. The king reportedly received advice from every direction. Some urged him to act quickly and restore calm before tensions escalated further. Others encouraged patience, arguing that any intervention could make the situation worse. The conflicting recommendations created an atmosphere where every choice carried potential consequences. Move too soon, and he risked appearing partial. Wait too long, and he risked allowing divisions to deepen. What made the situation particularly difficult was the growing concern about public perception. For generations, the monarchy had relied on projecting unity, stability, and continuity. Internal disagreements were not unusual, but they rarely became. Ion 7 emerged, visible enough to attract widespread attention. Now, however, insiders feared that even subtle signs of discord could overshadow one of the most important ceremonial moments on the royal calendar. The closer Garter Day approached, the greater that concern became. Yet despite mounting pressure, Charles reportedly avoided taking an immediate public position. To some observers, this reflected caution. To others, it reflected uncertainty. The absence of a clear response only intensified speculation. Every silence became meaningful. Every appearance generated fresh analysis. Every interaction sparked new theories about where the king's loyalties truly stood. Inside palace operations, uncertainty began affecting more than just conversations. Senior staff reportedly worried about the practical consequences of the ongoing tensions. Preparations for Garter Day required precision, coordination, and confidence. Instead, many found themselves navigating an atmosphere dominated by questions and R's. People continued performing their duties, but beneath the professionalism lingered a growing sense that something larger was unfolding. The emotional weight of the situation also became increasingly apparent. Anne's supporters believed they were defending principles they considered essential. Camilla's allies felt they were witnessing trusted relationships being weakened. Both sides viewed themselves as protecting the monarchy, yet their solutions appeared fundamentally incompatible. That contradiction transformed a procedural dispute into something much more personal. It became a struggle over competing visions of loyalty, responsibility, and leadership. Meanwhile, royal observers outside palace walls became obsessed with interpreting every development. A brief conversation generated headlines. A public appearance triggered fresh speculation. Even the smallest details attracted attention because everyone sensed that important decisions were being made somewhere behind closed doors. The monarchy's most private tensions were becoming the subject of increasingly public fascination. As the days passed, anticipation continued building. Questions remained unanswered. Alliances remained uncertain. The king remained silent. Yet the pressure surrounding him seemed to grow with every passing hour. Whatever resolution might eventually emerge, it was becoming clear that the moment of truth was approaching rapidly. Then came the final preparations for Garter Day itself, the moment when hidden tensions would become impossible to ignore. By the time Garter Day arrived, the atmosphere surrounding the event was unlike anything palace veterans could remember. Every position, every appearance, every absence carried meaning. Observers searched faces for clues. Courtiers monitored reactions. And as the procession prepared to begin, one undeniable reality emerged. The royal landscape had already changed, whether anyone was ready to admit it or not. For weeks, rumors had circulated, maculated behind closed doors. Questions had multiplied. Alliances had shifted. Yet until this moment, much of the drama remained hidden beneath layers of royal protocol and carefully maintained discretion. Garter Day changed that. Not because anyone stepped forward with a dramatic announcement, not because a public confrontation erupted, but because, for the first time, the consequences of everything that had been happening behind the scenes became impossible for insiders to ignore. From the earliest stages of preparation, experienced palace observers sensed that something was different. The event still carried all the tradition and symbolism expected of such an important royal occasion. Yet beneath that familiar structure existed an unmistakable undercurrent of tension. Conversations became shorter. Reactions became more measured. Attention focused not only on who was present, but also on who was not. And in royal circles, absences often speak louder than appearances. The missing figure, noticed almost immediately by those familiar with the institution's inner workings. Individuals who had once occupied reliable positions within the ceremonial framework were suddenly absent from roles many assumed they would continue holding. To the general public, such changes may have seemed insignificant. To insiders, however, they represented something far more consequential. Each absence served as another reminder of the quiet restructuring that had been unfolding for weeks. As the event progressed, revised arrangements became increasingly visible. People who understood the traditional order of things recognized subtle but meaningful shifts. The adjustments reflected decisions that had already been made, choices that could no longer be hidden behind private meetings and confidential discussions. The process that began with rumors and speculation had now reached a stage where its effects could be observed directly. Throughout the proceedings, palace staff reportedly rated under extraordinary pressure. Many had spent weeks navigating uncertainty while attempting to maintain normal operations. They understood that every detail would be scrutinized. Every adjustment would attract attention. Every unexpected development would generate fresh questions. The burden of maintaining stability during a period of internal tension weighed heavily on those responsible for ensuring the day unfolded smoothly. Meanwhile, speculation exploded among royal watchers. Analysts, commentators, and longtime observers searched for evidence supporting their theories. Some interpreted the changes as proof that Princess Anne's influence had reached a new level. Others viewed them as evidence of a deeper struggle that remained far from resolved. The lack of official explanations only intensified public fascination. The fewer answers available, the more determined people became to find them. At the center of that attention stood Anne herself. According to those observing the Princess Anne emerged situation, she remained remarkably composed throughout the entire affair. There were no signs of hesitation, no indication of second thoughts. After weeks of controversy, rumors, and mounting pressure, she reportedly carried herself with the same unwavering confidence that had characterized her actions from the very beginning. To supporters, this reflected conviction. To critics, it reflected determination that bordered on defiance. At the same time, the reduced visibility of Camilla's trusted circle became increasingly difficult to overlook. Those who had once occupied influential positions appeared less prominent than before. Whether intentional or symbolic, the effect was unmistakable. The balance that had existed only months earlier seemed altered. Questions about influence, authority, and future direction now dominated conversations throughout royal circles. What made the moment so powerful was that it transcended the event itself. Garter Day had become more than a ceremonial occasion. It had become a symbol of changing dynamics, a symbol of competing visions for the monarchy's future, a symbol of decisions whose full consequences had yet to be revealed. And as the day drew closer to its conclusion, a deeper realization began taking hold among those watching closely. The real story was never about who stood where during a single procession. The real story was about what those positions represented and what they suggested about the future. Yet the greatest consequences were never about one procession, they were about what those changes might mean for the future of the crown. Sometimes the most significant royal battles are not fought in public. They unfold quietly through influence, access, and trust. As analysts and insiders attempted to understand what had happened, a larger picture began to emerge. Princess Anne's actions appeared to represent more than a staffing adjustment. To many observers, they signaled a dramatic reordering of power inside. San emerged, the institution itself, one that could reshape relationships for years to come. In the days following Garter Day, conversations across royal circles began shifting away from the event itself and toward a far bigger question. What exactly had changed? For weeks, attention had focused on removed advisors, revised responsibilities, and growing tensions between competing factions. But now observers were beginning to connect those individual developments into a broader narrative. What they saw was not a temporary disagreement. What they saw was the possible emergence of an entirely new balance of influence within the monarchy. For years, Princess Anne had been viewed as one of the institution's most respected figures, admired for her discipline, consistency, and loyalty to duty. Yet respect and influence are not always the same thing. According to growing speculation, the events surrounding Garter Day suggested that Anne's influence now extended further than many had previously realized. The speed with which changes were implemented, the confidence behind those decisions, and the apparent lack of resistance all fueled discussions that her role within the monarchy had entered a new phase. Supporters viewed this development as a triumph for traditional royal values. In their eyes, Anne had demonstrated something increasingly rare in modern institutions: a willingness to act decisively when she believed the long-term interests of the crown were at stake. They argued that her actions reflected strength, stability, and an understanding of the monarchy's deeper responsibilities. To them, the outcome represented not disruption, but protection. Not division, but preservation. Others, however, interpreted the situation very differently. Critics warned that appearances could be deceiving. While Anne's supporters celebrated what they considered a strategic victory, opponents argued that unresolved tensions still lingered beneath the surface. Removing individuals from positions of influence did not automatically eliminate the loyalties, relationships, and frustrations that had developed over years. In some respects, they warned, the conflict might only be entering a more complicated stage. Much of the discussion centered on the future of Camilla's advisors. Their diminished visibility during Garter Day raised difficult questions that nobody seemed capable of answering with certainty. Would their reduced roles become permanent? Would influence gradually return once public attention faded? Or would further changes continue reshaping the palace hierarchy in ways few could currently predict? Every possible answer seemed to create even more uncertainty. Meanwhile, insiders reportedly noticed subtle signs that new alliances were beginning to form. Relationships that once appeared routine suddenly carried strategic importance. Conversations that previously attracted little notice became subjects of intense interest. Individuals who had remained neutral during and earlier stages of the dispute now found themselves carefully considering where they stood. The political landscape inside the monarchy was evolving, and everyone understood that adaptation would be necessary. Outside palace walls, public fascination reached extraordinary levels. What began as rumors surrounding ceremonial arrangements had transformed into a story about power, loyalty, and the future direction of one of the world's most famous institutions. Observers who rarely paid attention to internal royal matters suddenly found themselves captivated. Every new report generated fresh debate. Every theory produced counterarguments. The mystery surrounding what had truly happened continued driving interest higher. Yet beneath all the speculation remained a deeper truth. The monarchy had entered a period of uncertainty. Not instability necessarily, but uncertainty. The familiar balance that existed before Garter Day no longer seemed intact. New questions had emerged. Old assumptions had been challenged. Relationships that once appeared secure now seemed far more complicated. Perhaps that was why the story refused to fade. People sensed that they were not simply witnessing the aftermath of a disagreement. They were witnessing the consequences of a shift whose full impact had not yet revealed itself. Every answer appeared to uncover another mystery. Every conclusion seemed to open a new chapter. And just when it seemed the story had reached its conclusion, one final question emerged: was this truly the end, or merely the opening move in an even bigger royal struggle? The most powerful moments in royal history are often recognized only after they happen. Looking back, many now believe Garter Day was not the climax of this story, it was the beginning. Because once influence is challenged, once alliances are broken, and once trust is questioned, the consequences rarely stop with a single event. And according to growing speculation, the monarchy may still be feeling the effects of Princess Anne's quiet intervention long after the procession ends. As the immediate drama surrounding Garter Day began to fade, a new phase of the story quietly emerged. The attention was no longer focused solely on what had happened. Instead, it shifted toward what might happen next. That question lingered over every conversation, every rumor, and every analysis. For all the discussion surrounding removed advisors, altered responsibilities, and shifting loyalties, many insiders believed the most significant developments could still lie ahead. Within palace circles, speculation reportedly intensified rather than diminished. Some believed the restructuring had reached its natural conclusion. Others strongly disagreed. They pointed to the speed and precision of the changes already implemented and argued that such a coordinated effort rarely ended with a single event. If Garter Day had revealed a new balance of influence, then many wondered whether additional adjustments were already being considered behind closed doors. For Camilla's allies, the uncertainty created difficult choices. Individuals who once operated with confidence now reportedly found themselves reassessing relationships, strategies, and future expectations. The landscape around them had changed. Whether temporary or permanent, the shift could not be ignored. Some allegedly hoped for a gradual return to normality. Others feared that the institution had already entered a new era, one where old assumptions no longer applied. At the same time, Anne's supporters appeared to view recent events through a very different lens. To them, the developments surrounding Garter Day were not the conclusion of a campaign. They were the first visible signs of a broader effort to reinforce principles they believed were essential to the monarchy's future. In their view, the work remained unfinished. The questions that sparked concern years earlier had not disappeared. If anything, recent events had only GHT those concerns into sharper focus. Meanwhile, King Charles reportedly remained in the difficult position that had defined much of this unfolding drama. He continued balancing competing interests, competing loyalties, and competing visions for the institution he now led. Every decision carried weight. Every silence invited interpretation. Every action risked strengthening one side while disappointing another. The burden of maintaining unity during a period of uncertainty remained one of the greatest challenges facing the monarchy. Outside palace walls, fascination showed little sign of slowing. Royal observers continued searching for clues that might reveal what came next. New theories emerged almost daily. Some predicted reconciliation, others anticipated further tensions. Many simply believed that too many questions remained unanswered for the story to be truly over. The mystery itself became part of the narrative. Perhaps that was the most remarkable outcome of all. What began, I asked, as whispers about staffing changes evolved into a larger debate about influence, loyalty, and the future direction of the crown. It forced people to reconsider relationships they thought they understood. It challenged assumptions that had existed for years, and it left behind an atmosphere where certainty seemed increasingly difficult to find. Now the monarchy stands at a crossroads shaped not by grand speeches or public declarations, but by quiet decisions made far from public view. Whether those decisions ultimately strengthen the institution or deepen existing divisions remains unknown. What is clear is that their impact continues to ripple outward, affecting conversations, perceptions, and alliances in ways that may not be fully understood for years. Because in the House of Windsor, the quietest decisions often create the loudest echoes, and this story may be far from over. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.